I was born in Medicine Hat on November the 25th, 1925. My name is Muriel Frances Willen was my Willen Trumpour. And I live on our home where I grew up was on what we call the Bench, which is about 20 miles straight, pretty well 20 miles north of Maple Creek, of East End. Had one sister that survived. I had two sisters, but one died when she was only 2 months old. So I had the one sister, Nancy Kay, and she passed away in 2004. My father's name was Joseph Mark Willen, and he came from Northern England, and my mother's name was Grace Leggett, and she came from what they call the Midlands, Lincolnshire in England. They met over here. Actually, my father was secretary of the school, the school where I went to school. And so he was hiring teachers, and as it happened, he hired my mother.
Oh, yeah.
Because she was a teacher, and that's how they met.
Yes.
And she boarded with them.
So what was it like growing up?
Well, I grew up in the 30s, and people say what a hard time it was, and I guess it was, but everybody was the same, and for kids, we didn't worry about those things. So people helped each other and exchanged clothes and tips, and even sometimes your cow went dry, people would bring you milk or something. Mm-hmm. And we just got together and visited, played games, and the men played horseshoes. I went to school in Crossfell. It was called Crossfell School. It was south of Keeley Springs. My father was it was a German district. Most of the people were German, so I think when they organized it, they got my father to be the secretary because he was English and could handle, work in English. So when they went to name the school, he suggested the name Crossfell, which is the highest mountain in England, in the part where he was, in England. It's the highest mountain in England. Fell means mountain.
Oh.
So that's how it got named, Crossfell.
So how far was that from your home?
About 2.5 miles.
Did you walk to school?
Mostly we rode. We had a horse, and we mostly rode to school. Occasionally, my father needed the horse to work the land, and so we had to walk, which was quite a put out.
So did you take all your schooling there?
To grade 11. I took 9, 10, and 11 by correspondence. And then to take grade 12, there's certain things that's hard to take by correspondence. So my parents sent me to Abbey. My mother had a brother living there, a brother and his wife. So I lived with them and went to Abbey School and took my grade 12.
Oh, yeah.
And then the next year I went to, they called it normal school. It was the teacher training school in Moose Jaw.
So did you board with someone there?
Yes, and I had a friend and I lived together, Ivy Bircham, and I shared a room, and we boarded with a couple and went to school there.
So how did you get to apply for your first school?
At that time, there was a very big teacher shortage. They couldn't get enough teachers. So when I was going to normal school, they would ask if some of us would go out after 2 or 3 months and teach, and then come and take a school for that year, and then come back and finish our course. Well, I didn't want to ever come back, but they kept on giving you that option, and in Easter they did it again. They said they posted these schools on the wall, so you could choose one.
Oh, yeah.
There were several, and They said if you took one, then you wouldn't have to come back. They would credit you with your year. So then I applied for a school. And I applied for one that was by Richmond. So I taught 2 months there. It was a nice place, and that one school, it was it was all a German settlement too, but I really liked it. But it was a teacherage, and I thought, well, when I applied, I thought I'd love a teacherage all by myself. Well, I had no transportation or anything, so it was a little hard to live in a teacherage out. It was about 6 miles from Richmond.
Oh.
But there was a girl going to high school, and she drove by every morning, and she was going. So she would stop in and ask if I wanted something like groceries. So it worked out nice that way. Okay. But the following year, of course, she would be out of school, and she wouldn't be there. So I didn't want to stay because I didn't just know how I would manage. And at that time, I definitely didn't have money to buy a car. And next I went to Karna, which is, it's about 25 miles south of Piepot. It's still on the bench. It was about 5 or 6 miles from my parents' home.
Oh.
Not really, that sounds close, but it wasn't because there were no roads that way. So it was a long way on a road, but crow flies, it was about 5 miles.
So did you stay with a family there then?
Then I boarded with Frank and Dora Bertram. And I lived I think it was about 3.5 miles from the school. And we started out, we rode to school. They had 2 little kids. So I rode a horse and they had a horse for them. And Eleanor, I think, was 8 or 9, and Doug was just a beginner. So one sat in the saddle, one behind. And when we went to school, we had to go down quite through the bush, and we had to cross a couple of little creeks, tiny little, but shallow. And we were coming home one time. For some reason, just as we crossed one of these little creeks, a bee or something must have bitten the back of the kid's horse, and it just bolted, Well, Eleanor stayed in the saddle. The poor dog, he just went off. And he was wearing boots laced up like that. They both came off. How they came off when he got bumped like that. So I was quite worried about them. But as it happened, an Indian family came by with a buggy, and they had a girl with them that would be 11 or so. She said, well, she'd ride the horse home, and the 2 kids could ride in the buggy. So that's how they got back to the...
Oh, yeah.
When I got there, Doris said, I think you look worse than the kids. She said, your face is white. But it did scare me.
Yeah, no doubt. Sure it would. So you were there for how long then?
A year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then the following year, I taught at Cypress Lake School, which is, I don't know, 7 or 8 miles north of Vidora, somewhere in that area. And I boarded with Ernest and Marge Pettyjohn there.
Oh, yeah.
And I stayed till Christmas time, and then I left there, and I went home for a while, and then I took a school at Loomis, which was a difficult school. I had a hard time with that school, so I taught there until June and decided I wasn't going to teach anymore. So I took a job in the LID office in East End, which is the forerunner of the municipal offices.
Right.
And I worked there for 2 months, but it was only a temporary job. And I could have worked for the my Department of Agriculture, the ag rep was there, and but I decided, oh well, I'll try teaching again. The wages are a lot better. So that's when I got Gowanlock School.
Oh yeah, and what year would that be?
That was 1947, and I came to Gowanlock first part of November, so they hadn't had school until then. So I had to get them through that their grades in that short of a time. But it wasn't too many, and they were good little workers, and they made it.
Yeah. So did you have many discipline problems?
Not much in Gowanlock, just the ones I had in Loomis. And well, the superintendent of schools told me to if they wouldn't behave, that they could be expelled. And if they were expelled, the parents wouldn't get the family allowance. So between that and the school board there and the parents and we got them sorted out, and they were pretty good after that. I had to kind of sit on them, but at least they wouldn't mind. I remember at first they wouldn't, it was a nice school, and they wouldn't take off their boots to come in this classroom. And there was a nice entrance and a nice cloakroom. And I said, well, they have to. They can't walk on that floor with those boots. They can bring slippers, they can bring thick socks, I didn't care about it. Well, then I had a mother come down my neck about that. She couldn't afford anything for her. So we had a little conversation for a while. But eventually they decided they had to follow the rules, and they did. But it's hard work. I don't like doing that. I just don't.
So at Gowanlock then, was the school year different than we have now, I guess?
No, in Gowanlock it was a town, and they did the school year the same.
Oh, did they?
So it closed at the end of June and opened again at the beginning of September.
Oh.
But I came because they couldn't find a teacher. That's why I came in November.
Oh, yeah.
But they really should have had a teacher in September, but they just couldn't find one.
Oh, I see. So how long did you teach there then?
Then I stayed there for 3 years, I think it was.
So are there any other things that happened at the school? Did you have, I know Christmas concerts were important at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have other dances or anything there?
They had dances and things, and I think they did have Christmas concerts, but that particular year I didn't, because they needed the time to do their work, so we just had a bit of a party or something at Christmas time. It takes time to do a concert. I know I did a concert at Karna, and it's about wore me out.
Well, do you have any special memories about your time at any of those schools?
Oh, there's lots of nice memories. I always liked the kids. Some better than others, you do, but they were kids and they were fun. I do remember one at Karna School. They had what they called a penalty box. I guess that's what the teacher before had done, so I did it, and the penalty box was on my desk. And if somebody did something wrong, somebody would put a thing in the box to say, oh, so-and-so didn't, so-and-so swore, or so-and-so didn't bring, those little things. So anyway, and I think you took out 3, well, then you gave them a penalty. Well, they burned wood in the stove there, always burned wood, and you know how burning wood is. It takes a lot of wood to keep it going. So usually the penalty was to bring in an armful of wood. So this little fellow was in about grade 2, and he went home one day to his mother, and he said, "Can I take my sled to school?" And she said, "Well, why? What do you want that for?" He said, because I have to carry all this wood. And can I take the sled so I can carry the wood? And she said, well, how come you have to carry all the wood? Well, I keep forgetting to bring a pencil. That was his penalty. So after that, somebody else did the wood, I guess.
Oh, yeah. And the books the kids used, they were they ordered by you as a teacher?
I ordered them, and well, I first gave each parent a list of what books they would need and should have, and told them the prices, and then they would say whether to buy them or not. Some you really didn't have to get, but that would be kind of helpful. And so I would order them then after they said that they would pay for them. So when they came, they paid me for the parents. I'd give the parents a list of what it cost, and they'd pay me. Because sometimes they didn't send the book.
So,
oh yeah, they're ordinary workbook, scribblers and things, and pencils and all that, they bought themselves.
oh yeah.
That was why he was always borrowing somebody else's pencil. That's why he got his name in the box.
Oh, yeah. So if a child couldn't afford the textbook, was there ever a case when that would happen? Or?
Nobody ever did that. They all paid me whatever I asked.
Oh, yeah.
I tried not to, I tried to buy just what I thought really would be what they would need, because I didn't think they had that much money. But no, I never had any trouble with them that way. I think the school provided the reader.
Oh,
and as time went on, they got to providing more books. When I first started, I think when I started school, that's all they provided was a reader. But as it went on, and as I was teaching, they would provide a speller and an arithmetic or math book. When I went, the teacher put the math on the board, and you did it that way. And gradually they got more. They'd give them the science books would come and the social books would come. Just as a gradual work, I guess. See, when I first started teaching, it was right at the time that they were changing over from those little independent schools, I guess you would say, to the school unit.
Oh.
The unit was taking them over. Because when I first started at Karna, pardon me, it was the local people who had hired me and just told me what my wage would be. But the following year, the unit had taken it over, so then the unit hired me and told me what
Did your wage go up or down then?
Fortunately, every year it went up. I think it went up $100 every year. I think the first year that I taught, it was $1,000 a year. That was what the wage was. And so when I finished, I think it was $1,600 or something like that.
Yeah.
I think that's about what I don't remember for sure.
When you were teaching, was there a dress code, and were there other rules of things that you could and couldn't do?
Not so much when I was teaching. I think just before, but when they got so short on teachers, they let a lot of that go. When I was going to school, when I was about 7 or 8, or not very old, and there was another little girl in my grade, and after school one day, instead of going home like we were supposed to, there was a culvert on the road just out a little ways from the school, and we had to go and play. I don't know why we had to go and play there, but we did. And so we were playing that, and after we were done, we went back. We'd forgotten something, we ran back to the school. And when we ran into the school, the teacher was smoking a pipe. And she put it down. Well, she was, please don't tell anybody. And I don't think the other little girl did for years and years. We never told anybody. My dad was the secretary of the school board, so I definitely didn't tell him. But she was quite worried. And we were just kids and we could tell. That's so funny.
Or you weren't allowed to smoke period.
No, she wasn't supposed to smoke. That would be a
Oh.
no-no. And it was after class, but no. And a pipe of all things. This little curly pipe, I can remember that.
So what was the dress code then?
I think before then they had to wear, but good dress clothes. I don't know, more like suits and stuff, I suppose. I really don't know.
You could wear slacks?
You shouldn't, not me, no. Should wear a dress, but I quite often, because I have trouble wearing dresses, really, I'm so long here. I wear skirts and sweaters, and I wore skirts and sweaters most of the time. That was what I wore.
Can you tell us how you met Dawn and what it was like to move out to the ranch?
Well, it was kind of funny the way. When I came to Govan-Lock, Dawn and Ed were in Vancouver, because this was in November I came, and they had gone to Vancouver to find work. So they were working in Vancouver. So when I first came, they weren't there. And I went with Francis Carter for a while. And anyway, Ed came back, but Dawn didn't get back until, he came back a little later. Anyway, Ed came first, and he was there for maybe a couple of weeks, and I met him. Dawn had trouble with his fingers, and he had to have them operated on, and so he stopped in Medicine Hat and had these tendons pulled down. So then when he came, there was the 17th of March dance, and Ed came to the school with Dawn, and I had never seen Dawn before. And I just had a little bit of a tip with Francis Carter, so I wasn't going anywhere, and so he asked me if I'd go to the dance with him. That was that. Very romantic. And well, you know, we would dances, and he liked to play ball, so we went to ball games, and I suppose that's probably mostly what we did. I don't know. I can't remember, well, you know, anything.
Do you remember anything about the musicians at the dance?
Oh, yes. When we went to Council, it was Charlie and the Wildcats used to play sometimes. Do you remember about Charlie and the Wildcat? And who else was it played at dance? Oh, Mac, you know, what they call that band. They played quite a bit. And then later, Rick and Wilkes and them played there quite a lot.
Paul Cowring played it.
Oh yeah, they played probably as much as any.
Did you or Dawn play instruments?
No.
Well, the kids are so musical.
They got that from
Can
Rick.
you tell us about your family, your kids?
Well, there's the three. There's Ivy and Jean, and then Pat. Ivy was always more the student type. She was always interested in, oh gosh, she wrote stories and drew pictures, and I don't know what else she used to do. She was in her room half the time doing all this sort of stuff. Jean was the opposite. She was out of the house as much as she could possibly be, especially if dishes were. And Pat was always messing with something. He was the one that was always wanting to fix something. I think he took apart, I don't know how many alarm clocks and different clocks, and I don't think any of them ever ran again.
Any particular hardships that you?
Well, it was hard because when we started, we only had, I don't know, they were, well, the way they had it, Don and Pat had cows, and then Mrs. Linder, she was Mrs. Scarlett at the time, and her husband had died, so they looked after her cows, and they got half the calves, I believe, and so that's sort of how we started into cows. And when they built Gowanlock Hall about the time I came there too, because the first one had burnt down. And so they had a raffle, and Howard Buchanan donated a bull calf. He picked out a nice bull calf and donated it, and I won it. So that was the start of our herd. And we just sort of built from that, and Don worked on the road, and he worked down at the Spangler place, and he worked on the railroad, different things till we got enough. Because you couldn't, if you're trying to build up a herd, you can't sell cattle if you're trying to build them up. So yeah, it wasn't easy, but well, I guess it worked.
And who are your neighbors around that you visited with?
Well, there were stockies, and peacocks lived on the pasture at that time, and Carters. And they moved away, when, I don't know, when you were in about grade 4 or 5. And there was McInerney's. They were a really nice couple, Eddie McInerney and Pat. His wife's name was Pat, and they were our age, and so were the Carters, so they were the closest. And so we would visit with them, but Carters moved away, and McInerney's lived down there by where peacocks are, and the government bought their place to put into the pasture, so they moved away. So then the neighbors were older, but there was Hallidays, Beulah and Jim, and there were Pattersons that lived on the place Jean's on, and McRae's in town, and Fritz and Florence Kellring in town.
We used to have card parties at the hotel. The
They had
Vintners
card parties. And they had more dances and things. We always had John Linder's birthday dance. They had to have a dance for that. That was in the end of April, I think.
Well, when you were teaching at Gowanlock, you stayed at the hotel, I think.
Yes.
And who was managing the hotel at that time?
Andy McRae and Joe. Andy and Joe McRae.
So did you have a special bedroom that?
It was just one of the rooms, one of the hotel rooms. I think it was number 9. I think it had a 9 on the door.
And what about eating then?
Well, then I came there. They provided my meals.
Oh,
I came back from school at noon usually and had dinner at noon or lunch.
well, the school was right in town then?
No, it was out about, I would say, maybe a quarter of a mile or so. It wasn't right in the town. It wasn't that far out.
So you didn't have to cook any of your own meals then?
No. No, I didn't know how, so it's a good thing.
Well, that's pretty nice.
Oh, it was. It was very nice to stay there, and there were a lot of people coming and going because at that time the railroad was the transportation. Everything came by the mail and groceries and people and the whole thing. So mail day or train day was quite the day. Everybody got to the station, stood on the platform to watch the train come in.
Can you tell us about what the hotel was like? And
It was quite busy at that time because the train went through, and like at the time, that time, you know, salesmen for the stores and things, they called them travelers, and they would stop. Well, they'd stop overnight and they'd stay overnight. They'd come the hotel, the store salesman, and then there was the head of the wheat pool elevators, and different ones would stay overnight. And then in hunting season, it was just a zoo, because I don't know how many people would come. And, well, the hotel would be overflowing. And then there were a lot of other people that would, those days they didn't have campers and things much that they do now. They'd sleep in their cars or tents, and then they would come and eat at the hotel. So it was really quite busy there. And then they had people coming and going, and eventually they opened the store there when Calmerings moved away. So they had the store, it was in the hotel. The hotel originally had been built that way. One part of the lower floor was a store. And then this other part was the lobby and the dining and kitchen, and then the rooms were above.
Who built the hotel, do you know?
John Linder.
John Linder?
Yeah. He built it. This is the story they said. He built it and he ran it for a while, and then Dad Gaff bought it. And so that's how Andy got into it, because Andy's first wife was Alla Gaff. And so then she had the hotel, and so when he married her, that's how and of course she died, unfortunately.
What other businesses were there in Gowanlock?
There was the store and the post office and the service station, house for the people that worked on the track. Section house, they called that. And I don't know that there were any other, can't remember any other businesses offhand.
Well, the elevator must have been.
Well, the elevator, yes.
Mr. Silich in his garden.
Oh, yes. Well, he lived, when I came, he lived out of Gowanlock back, because he was only the first man. There was I don't know how they went, the section. Anyway, the boss section man had a house in town. In fact, that's the house after Don and I were married. Alex Silich got to be the head section man, and Don worked for him. And so we lived in the section house for that 6 months after when we got married. So we lived with Alec.
Then what did you do for a house after that then?
Well, then we moved down to where we live now.
But was there a house already there?
Yeah, that was this Mrs. Scarlett. It was the Scarlett house, and Don and Ed had Mrs. Scarlett's cows. And then Mrs. Scarlett married John Linder because he was living in town. He was divorced. So they were in their 60s or something. But anyway, so they got married, so then we lived in her house.
Oh, I see.
And that's where we lived till we built our own house, but we always lived in the same. We built our own house just beside it
Oh,
later.
So you got a new house?
Yeah, we,
And who built that?
Don built that. He did too. He pretty well did the whole thing himself. I don't know that what was it, the one thing that I said he had to do that I didn't want him to do, but I can't remember what it was. Install the furnace, I think that was. I didn't think that would be the best idea. But he did I remember him doing the wiring. And he went someplace and they had those little week-long things they used to do coming around.
yeah.
And he went to one of that, so that's how he learned to do electricity. And so he wired the house, and he was following the code really well. So downstairs, he left the slack in the wires, like it said in the code. And then when the inspector came, looks like a Christmas decorations. He didn't like that at all.
Oh. So did he make him change it then?
I think he just had to shorten up the wires or something. It didn't have to do much, but that's funny. Christmas decorations hanging on the beams of the basement.
Before you got that electricity, you must have depended on what, coal for?
Yeah. In the old house when we first were married, it was coal and coal oil lamps and, you know, that.
Did the coal come on the train?
Yeah, yeah. There'd be a whole coal car and it would stop it, and there was a place for it to unload it.
How about your water supply?
Well, it wasn't very good. We had a dugout, and when the trains went through, well, when I first started riding the train, they were they ran all those, not diesel, but the others.
Steam.
And they had a great big water tower in Gowanlock, and then they had a cistern. And when they'd come from Shotovan, they'd fill that cistern with water. It was right in front of the section house where we stayed. So when we wanted drinking water, I would go to that cistern and fill just cream cans. And then we used the dugout water for the washing and that sort of stuff. Strained out the little wigglies and all. Other interesting wildlife and other dead life and everything, I guess.
What about when you moved down to your other house then?
Oh, that we had electricity and, then
For water.
he dug another big dugout beside not too far from where the house is. There was a coulee there. And then he put in those, like, that was a big idea at the time, filter wells. They put two cisterns down beside the dugout. And one was full of sand, and it was supposed to come through this sand and up and through the other one, and that would clean it. And then had it piped into the house, which worked for a while, but it didn't work very long because they just plugged up. And it was a good idea, but it didn't work.
Yeah.
One of those. So after that, then he hauled water, and eventually he dug a well. It's 700 feet deep, is it? Yeah, and hit the. Dug one in the Lease, and it hit the Milk River. It's about 1,000 feet, and it hit the Milk River. But this one was I can't remember.
Isn't it the Judith Basin?
Pardon?
Judith Basin?
The Judith Basin. The Judith Basin is the one that ours is, and it's really, really soft water. He's had that store, and then Andy Gray had it. And they stored practically everything, you know, that you would really need. Nails and nylon stockings, I remember that. You know, just...
The only thing is the fresh produce would be hard.
Yeah. The fresh stuff came on the train, and when the grocery came on the train, and Wednesday was the day the train came in. And so everybody came to town on Wednesday because that's when the fresh stuff was in and stuff. So that you'd get your fresh vegetables and stuff from the train.
You really relied on the train quite a bit.
Oh, the train, yeah, everything. The train brought the mail and everything. And the mail was a lot faster on the train too than it is now. You could actually, when the train was in the station, if you wanted to mail a letter, there was a slot on the train to mail it if you had the stamps. Maybe you could even get stamps. I don't know that. I know you could mail a letter. And they sorted it on the train. And so if you wanted to send a letter to Vancouver, put it on the train, well, till it would get there practically the same day for a change.
Yeah. When you shipped calves, where did you take them to? Did you take them to Altawan?
Yeah, yeah.
And was there a scale?
Yes, there was a scale, yeah. There was even stockyards in Gowanlock, but when I first came, but they sold them, and Wahlberg bought them. Mick Wahlberg bought them. But yeah, they took them to Altawan. They could weigh them there, and put them on the train. They had a boxcar, it's a mixed train would come in. They had other freights would go through, but they had a mixed train. And on the mixed train, they had one passenger car. That's how I got to Gowanlock. I got on the train and rode on very slow, because I stopped everywhere and switched through things and did. But I didn't mind it.
And then you could take the train and go right through to Lethbridge and out that
Yeah,
way?
You had to go to Lethbridge, you had to stay over at Manyberries because it stopped there. And the same way the other way, you could go to Shaunavon and you'd have to stay in Shaunavon. And then you could go to Moose Jaw. And once you got to Moose Jaw, you would be on the main line, and then you could ride the train. If you got on the express, they would go through just the big cities. Or they had the locals who would stop on the... Been through practically every small town. And a small town like Gowanlock didn't have a passenger train, not like Maple Creek had the passenger trains. But they had one freight train. They had mostly freight trains going through, but they had one freight train where they would put a passenger car on the back end. And so then you could ride in the passenger car and ride in the train. Then I'd get on the train at Ravenscraig usually and get off at Consell or Gowanlock. And when I went to Abbey, I got on the train at Pie Pot. That's the first time I ever rode a train, so I was a little excited about that, because I had to change trains at Swift Current to go to Abbey. Abbey had a different train. Abbey was quite convenient, the train at Abbey, because Abbey is on that Empress, what they call the Empress line. It's Empress to Swift Current. And they had a passenger train that would go through every day, and it was just a passenger train, and it would go in the morning early from Empress to Swift Current, and then later in the afternoon it would come back. So a lot of the people in Abbey, especially women who didn't drive or anything, got on the train. They'd get on the train in the morning and go to Swift Current, do their shopping or see the doctor or dentist or whatever, come back in the afternoon. And it really worked good for them.
So when it came into Gowanlock, did it keep on going west then? Or?
Yes, it went west. The train came from Shaunavon and it went to Manyberries that night. The next night it went to Lethbridge, and the next day it came back to Manyberries. And then the next day it came back and went back to Shaunavon. I think that's the way it was. There were two trains. There was a train crew based in Shaunavon and a train crew based in Lethbridge. So Monday morning, the Lethbridge train would come to Manyberries, but the train from Shaunavon would come just to Consell. And the next day, the one at Consell would go down what we said the branch. So it would go down to Valmarie, down through by Loomis and stuff. So when I went on the train to Loomis, I got on the train at Ravenscraig, but I had to spend the night at Consell. And then the next day I got on the train to get to Loomis, and Loomis was just, I don't know, about 20 miles south of East End.
Oh, yeah.
And so they had a way they worked those two trains to do that, and then it worked.
I wish they still had it.
Oh, I do, and I really I kind of like going on the train, Dawn and I, because of the way the train is now. Havre it has a high line or something they call it. And the trains meet at Havre in the middle of the day. So you can get on the train in Havre and go either way in the middle of the day. So Don and I went to Detroit one year because Don had a relative in Detroit. And we went in, anyway, maybe the end of September or the beginning October. And Michigan is beautiful. They have tours and things for the colors of the trees and things. It's just hard to believe. And you know, traveling on a train, it's so much more fun than the highway because you don't have billboards, and you drive by some places, you go right past somebody's backyard. And so there was places where there was piles of pumpkins all piled up. Nor cooking, I didn't like that either. No, I did a lot of sewing. I made practically all my own clothes, and I made most of the kids' clothes, I think, and I made clothes for different people. Gardening, I liked to garden, I did like, but water was kind of a problem. So if there was water in the dam, because house water wasn't good, mind you, soft as it was, but it wasn't good for plants. And when there was water in the dam, then I would get a garden, and we'd pump water off the dam. But if there was no water in the dam, usually there wasn't enough rain or anything.
Reading, what about that?
Oh yes, I like to read. Yeah, I did like to read.
Where did you get your reading material?
Well, they used to have a traveling library for one thing, that I think the pool, and then there was at one time you could order books from the library, and they would come and you could keep them so long, and then you had to mail them back. And they were postage paid, the government did that. So you'd get this box of books every once in a while. And sometimes they'd get them in the store. I think maybe in the hotel they would get them. And you could go to the hotel and borrow a book. And so we got quite a few books that way. And I took papers. There were newspapers that were interesting in those days, had stuff in them. The Free Press had a whole bunch of different articles and different letters and things, and it was really interesting. And the producer had the Young Cooperators. I wonder if you would remember. That's too old for you. Ivy wrote and had letters printed in that. What did she call herself? Boston Ivy, I think. Boston Ivy, I think, because Boston is where my mother came from in England.
Yeah, housework should be banned. You should never have to do that.
No, it was, I don't know, everybody was the same, so you didn't notice that you, like coal oil lamps, which were real. Chimneys were every morning you got to clean those darn chimneys and things. Think of that, and now you just pull a switch or something and complain if the bulb burns out.
And washing was a lot harder than
Wash was a big, yeah. If I was, yeah, washed on a washboard. I remember my mother washing on a washboard. And she had, they had a sheep, and they sheared it, and so she wanted the wool. And so she was washing that. I remember coming home from school, because we went to school, when I went to school, we went to school from the 1st of March until till Christmas. So we went to school all summer. And so we'd be coming home from school in the summer when it was really hot, and she had the cook stove on. So she'd be washing, and she'd wash because she put a boiler on the stove to boil her clothes. So then she decided to make bread the same day while she had the stove going. And then she'd have to iron one day. I'd come home from school and sort of sweat running down. She'd be ironing and making bread, and the whole kitchen would just like sauna. And you know, that's the way that wasn't unusual. I'm sure the other families were doing the same thing.
What would you like people to remember about you?
I don't know. I never thought about it. I hope they would remember that I, was honest and what?
Enjoyed life, I guess.
Well, yeah, I did. The life we lived was hard, but I wouldn't have done it different. I didn't want it different. It was the way I liked to be. I liked to be out there with the wide open spaces and the animals, because I liked animals and things. And
Just an all-around nice person.
thank you.